The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called at the most unusual hour, and representatives from 47 different species filled the massive chamber with anxious chatter and concerned glances at one another. Ambassador Velcros of the Zythene Concordat stepped forward to the central platform, his translucent skin flickering with patterns of deep concern as he activated the holographic display system. Above him, honored members of the council, Velcros began, his voice carrying through the translation matrix to all present. We gather today to discuss a matter of grave importance regarding our newest members, the humans of Earth. A murmur rippled through the assembly as the hologram sprang to life, showing the recent battle of Kepler 442 in devastating detail. The footage showed a Kryn raiding fleet of 12 warships, each one bristling with plasma cannons and graviton projectors that could tear apart asteroids with ease. Facing them were only 5 human vessels, smaller and seemingly less advanced, bearing the markings of something called the United Nations Space Command. As you can see, Velcros continued, the engagement should have lasted mere minutes. With total Kryn victory assured, the hologram played forward, showing the Kryn fleet moving into standard attack formation, their shields glowing with the characteristic purple hue of quantum barrier technology that had protected warships for 10,000 years. Then the human ships opened fire, and everything the council thought they understood about warfare began to unravel. Before their eyes, the first volley wasn't plasma or antimatter or any form of energy weapon recognized by galactic science. It was solid projectiles, primitive kinetic rounds propelled by chemical reactions that left visible exhaust trails in the vacuum of space. Ridiculous, someone muttered from the thermal collective seating area. Chemical propellants were abandoned 15 million years ago, but the ridicule died quickly as the projectiles struck home, punching through Kryn shields as if they weren't even there. The sheer kinetic force overwhelming barriers designed to deflect energy weapons. 3 Kryn ships went dark immediately, their hulls torn open by what amounted to advanced bullets traveling at impossible velocities. The Kryn commander apparently recognized the threat and ordered evasive maneuvers. But the human ships responded with something even stranger: missiles that changed direction mid-flight, following their targets with persistent determination. Note the propulsion system, Velcros said, highlighting one of the missiles. They're using controlled explosions for thrust explosions. Honored members, something our ancestors abandoned when they discovered anti-gravity. The council watched in growing disbelief as more Kryn ships fell to these primitive weapons. And then the humans deployed their final surprise. The lead human ship fired something different, something that didn't register on any known sensor system until it was too late. Whatever. It was struck the Kryn flagship dead center. And instead of an explosion, there was a moment of eerie stillness before the entire vessel simply came apart, its hull fragmenting into thousands of pieces, as if it had been struck by an invisible hammer from all directions at once. Our analysts cannot identify this weapon, Velcros admitted, his skin patterns showing deep purple frustration. The energy signature makes no sense. The delivery system appears to be another chemical rocket, and the effect is unlike anything in our databases. The hologram showed the remaining Kryn ships retreating in disorder, fleeing from 5 human vessels that by all logic should have been nothing more than target practice. The humans lost no ships, Velcros concluded. They suffered minimal damage, and they won a battle they had no right to win. We need to understand how and why. Across the galaxy, aboard the human vessel UNSC Indomitable, Captain Sarah Chun sat in her ready room reviewing the same battle from her own ship's perspective. Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, stood at attention while she scrolled through his after-action report on her datapad. So let me get this straight, Sarah said, looking up at him with barely concealed amusement. We won because we used bullets and missiles. standard shipboard railguns, and hunter-killer missiles. Ma'am, Marcus confirmed. Plus one experimental kinetic penetrator, based on the old rod from God concept. Sarah leaned back in her chair and laughed. A sound that seemed out of place given they'd just fought their first engagement against hostile aliens. Marcus. We just made first contact with a hostile alien species. We were outnumbered more than 2 to 1. They had energy shields and plasma weapons straight out of science fiction. And we beat them with technology from the 21st century. 22nd century. Ma'am, Marcus corrected with a slight smile. The railguns are definitely upgraded from the original concepts. Upgraded bullets are still bullets, Sarah countered. Do you realize how insane this is? We're the new kids in a galaxy full of species that have been traveling between stars for longer than humans have existed. And we just won a battle using weapons they probably consider museum pieces. Marcus shifted slightly, his expression growing more serious as he considered the implications of their victory. Permission to speak freely. Ma'am, always. Marcus, you've earned that much. I don't think they saw us coming because our weapons are so simple, he said carefully. Their shields were probably designed to stop energy weapons and exotic particles. Nobody thought to optimize them against high-velocity chunks of metal. Sarah nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes as she considered the broader strategic picture. It's like bringing a gun to a laser fight, she mused. Except the laser people forgot that guns still work just fine. Something like that. Ma'am, and that experimental weapon, the one that took out their flagship. Marcus grinned despite himself, clearly proud of the unconventional approach they'd taken. Kinetic penetrator with a resonance warhead. We basically shot a telephone pole at them at 0.95% light speed. And when it hit, the warhead set up a harmonic vibration that propagated through their hull structure. We shook them to death. Technically. MAAM. We induced catastrophic structural failure through resonance cascade. But yes, we shook them to death. Sarah stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars that humanity had only recently reached, thinking about what their victory meant for the future. Marcus, I want you to run full diagnostics on all our weapon systems and start thinking about what else we have that these aliens might not expect. Ma'am, are you suggesting we prepare for more engagements? I'm suggesting that we just became the galaxy's weird new problem, Sarah said quietly. And if the Kryn attacked us once, they or someone else will try again next time. I want to be ready with weapons so stupid that nobody sees them coming. Marcus saluted and left the ready room. Already planning additional surprises for their potential enemies, Sarah remained at the viewport, wondering what the rest of the galaxy thought of humanity now that they'd seen what Earth's warriors could do. She didn't have to wait long to find out the first. Diplomatic communications from the Galactic Council arrived within hours, requesting detailed information about human military capabilities and the immediate cessation of what they called dangerously unpredictable weapons technology. Sarah read the message twice, then sent a simple reply. Humanity would be happy to discuss military matters, but they wouldn't be giving up their defenses just because other species found them unconventional. The galaxy, she suspected, was about to learn that humans didn't follow anyone's rules but their own, and that was going to cause problems for everyone involved. Calvaresh had spent 300 years studying military technology across the galaxy, analyzing weapon systems from 1,000 different species, and he had never encountered anything quite as frustrating. As the humans, the Galactic Council had assigned him to lead a research team to Earth, with a specific mission: discover the secret behind humanity's inexplicable military success and determine whether they posed a threat to galactic stability. His ship descended through Earth's atmosphere toward a military installation in what humans called Colorado, and Calvaresh reviewed everything. known about humanity's weapons technology. For the 1,000th time, chemical propellants obsolete. For 15 million years, kinetic. Projectiles abandoned when energy weapons proved more efficient. Explosive warheads primitive compared to antimatter. Or quantum detonators, none of it made sense. And yet the humans had defeated a Kryn raiding fleet with contemptuous ease, using exactly these outdated technologies. The landing was smooth. And Calvarish emerged from his ship, expecting to find some hidden laboratory filled with revolutionary technology that would explain everything instead. He found General Patricia Rodriguez waiting for him with a smile and an extended hand, surrounded by what appeared to be very ordinary military facilities. "Dr. Calvarish, welcome to Earth," Patricia said warmly. "We're honored to host the Council's foremost weapons researcher." Calvarish studied the general carefully, noting the complete absence of deception in her body language and pheromone signature. "General Rodriguez, I appreciate your hospitality. I hope you understand that my mission here is to fully understand your military capabilities." "Of course," Patricia replied, gesturing for him to follow her toward the main building. "We have nothing to hide, in fact. I think you're going to be surprised by just how simple our approach really is." Over the following weeks, Calvarish and his team were given unprecedented access to human military facilities, weapons testing ranges, and even classified research programs. What they discovered left them increasingly bewildered and disturbed. The humans had indeed used railguns, electromagnetic launchers that accelerated solid projectiles to extreme velocities using magnetic fields. But why? Calvarish asked during one demonstration, watching a tungsten rod obliterate a test target. Why use solid projectiles when plasma or particle beams would be more efficient? The human weapons engineer, a cheerful woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, looked at him as if he'd asked why water was wet. "Because railguns are simple, reliable, and the ammunition is cheap," she explained. "We can make kinetic rounds from almost anything: tungsten, depleted uranium, steel, even compacted garbage if we're desperate." "Garbage," Calvarish repeated faintly, his translator struggling to confirm that he'd heard correctly. "Well, dense garbage," Sarah clarified. "Metal waste, construction debris. Basically anything we can compress and accelerate at sufficient velocity. Mass is mass. And kinetic energy doesn't care if you're shooting a precision-crafted projectile or a chunk of recycled spacecraft hull." Calvarish felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: genuine horror at a military concept. The humans weren't just using primitive weapons. They were weaponizing their trash, turning waste materials into instruments of destruction through sheer brute force application of physics. "Let me understand this clearly," he said carefully. "You are telling me that humanity's military strategy includes the possibility of launching garbage at enemy vessels?" "If necessary, yes," Sarah confirmed cheerfully. "Though we prefer proper ammunition when available, garbage is more of a backup option for extended campaigns, where resupply might be difficult." His horror deepened when they showed him the resonance warhead that had destroyed the Kryn flagship. The principle was absurdly simple: analyze the target's whole composition and structural design, calculate its natural harmonic frequencies, then deliver a warhead that would vibrate at exactly the right frequency to induce catastrophic structural failure. "This is based on a bridge collapse from your year 1940, Calvarish said, reading through the technical documentation with growing disbelief. "You weaponized a structural engineering disaster, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge." "Yes," confirmed the lead physicist, Dr. James Anderson. "We figured if wind could shake a bridge apart, a precisely tuned weapon could do the same to a spaceship. Turns out we were right. But this violates every principle of elegant weapon design," Calvarish protested. Efficient weapons should use exotic particles or quantum effects, not vibrations. James shrugged with the infuriating casualness that Calvaresh was learning characterized human military thinking. Exotic particles require exotic generators. Quantum weapons need quantum computers to aim them. Vibrations just need the right frequency and enough power to generate it. You chose this approach because it was easier. We chose this approach because it works, James corrected. And because nobody expects it when you're the newcomers in a galaxy full of civilizations millions of years older than you. The element of surprise is worth more than elegance. Calvaresh spent his evenings compiling reports for the council, trying to explain what he was learning in terms that would make sense to species that had long ago abandoned such primitive thinking. The humans hadn't discovered some revolutionary new physics. They had simply refused to abandon old physics that still worked perfectly well. They used chemical rockets because chemical rockets were reliable and easy to manufacture. They used bullets because bullets punched holes in things very effectively. They used explosives because explosives released energy quickly and violently. Every human weapon system followed the same philosophy: simple, robust, effective, and cheap enough to mass produce. They fight like they're expecting to lose equipment. Calvaresh told his research team during one briefing. Every weapon system is designed to be replaced. Nothing is so complex that it can't be manufactured in quantity. Quantity over quality, one of his assistants observed. A strategy that hasn't been viable for advanced civilizations in epochs. Except it is viable when your enemies optimize for quality. Calvaresh countered grimly. The Kryn shields were masterworks of defensive technology, and they failed completely against massed kinetic fire because nobody designed them to stop old-fashioned bullets traveling at relativistic speeds. The final revelation came during a visit to what humans called their experimental weapons division, where researchers were testing concepts too unusual for standard military deployment. Calvaresh watched demonstrations of sonic weapons that could incapacitate targets without killing them. Electromagnetic pulse generators built from salvaged electronics. And even a prototype that used focused microwave radiation to heat water molecules in enemy ship hulls. This last one, General Rodriguez explained, is basically a giant microwave oven pointed at enemy ships. We cook them from the inside out. You're turning kitchen appliances into weapons. We're applying proven heating technology to a military context. Patricia corrected with a smile. But yes, essentially we're asking, what if we made a really big microwave? Calvaresh returned to his quarters that night and began drafting his report to the council with trembling hands. Humanity's secret weapon wasn't a secret at all. It was their complete lack of sophistication combined with an apparently limitless creativity in applying basic principles to violent ends. They didn't use these weapons because they were smart. They used them because they didn't know they shouldn't. Very advanced species in the galaxy had spent millions of years optimizing their technology, refining their weapons, pursuing ever more elegant solutions to military problems. Humans had been in space for less than 2 centuries, and they were still in the phase where they'd try anything to see if it worked. Paint chips accelerated to near light speed, carried more destructive energy than antimatter warheads. Vibrations could tear apart ships designed to withstand plasma. Fire garbage could become ammunition. In a pinch, the sheer wastefulness, the brute force inelegance, the complete disregard for conventional military theory, it all violated everything Calvaresh had been taught about civilized warfare, and it worked terrifyingly well precisely because it was so stupid that nobody had bothered to defend against it. Titled his report, Humanity, a Military Assessment. and included a single recommendation that he knew would cause panic when the Council read it. Humanity should be considered an extreme threat not because of superior technology, but because they're inferior. Technology is applied with such creative disregard for conventional limitations that they effectively fight outside all established military doctrine. They are dangerous because they are still stupid enough to try things that shouldn't work and then make them work anyway. Calvarish sent the report and sat back, wondering how the galaxy would respond to the news that their newest members were barbarians with railguns and the terrifying willingness to weaponize literally anything they could get their hands on. The Kryn Empire's demand for a rematch arrived with all the pompous formality their species was known for, delivered by their High Commander Zarthod himself to the assembled Galactic Council. The previous engagement was a fluke, Zarthok declared, his armored form radiating barely contained rage. Humanity employed weapons so primitive and unexpected that our defensive systems were not calibrated to counter them. This will not happen again. Ambassador Velcros shifted uncomfortably in his seat, knowing that the Council was about to make a decision that would likely backfire spectacularly. High Commander, perhaps cooler heads should prevail. Another military engagement serves no purpose. It serves honor. Zarthok snapped back, and it will demonstrate that the Kryn Empire's previous defeat was merely bad luck, not a reflection of actual military capability. The Council voted, and despite reservations from several members, including Velcros, they agreed to mediate a second engagement between the Kryn and humanity under strict rules of warfare. The limitations were extensive. No kinetic weapons above certain velocities, no chemical propellants, no unconventional weapon systems that fell outside established galactic military doctrine. Captain Sarah Chun received the Council's ruling aboard the Indomitable with her senior staff assembled around the briefing table. So they're banning our railguns, Lieutenant Marcus Webb said, reading through the document with obvious frustration, and our missiles, and basically everything that worked in the last fight. They're trying to force us to fight on their terms, Sarah observed, scrolling through the restrictions with a thoughtful expression, using their weapons, their tactics, their rules. We don't have energy weapons that can match Kryn plasma cannons, her chief engineer pointed out. If we accept these terms, we're accepting a fight we can't win. Sarah looked up from the datapad and smiled in a way that made her staff simultaneously relieved and nervous. They banned our railguns and missiles, she said slowly, but read the restrictions carefully. They specifically list kinetic weapons, chemical propellants, and explosive warheads. Right. Which eliminates most of our arsenal. But they don't say anything about sonic weapons, Sarah continued, her smile widening, and they don't mention acoustic resonance, harmonic frequencies, or vibration-based systems. The briefing room fell silent as her staff processed what she was suggesting. Marcus spoke first, his voice filled with dawning realization and slight disbelief. Ma'am, are you seriously proposing we weaponize sound waves? I'm proposing we use every advantage we have that doesn't violate the letter of their restrictions, Sarah corrected. And I'm suggesting that our friends in research and development have been working on something very interesting that technically qualifies as a non-kinetic, non-chemical, non-explosive weapon system. 3 weeks later, the Second Battle of Deneb began. With all the formality the Galactic Council could muster, observers from 20 different species watched from designated safe zones as the Kryn fleet emerged from FDL travel with overwhelming confidence. High Commander Zarthok commanded 15 dreadnoughts, each one upgraded since the previous engagement with enhanced shields, specifically calibrated to stop kinetic projectiles at any velocity. The human fleet consisted of 7 ships, slightly larger than before, and equipped with weapon systems that confuse the observer's sensors. What are they carrying? Velcros asked the Council's military analyst, watching the pre-battle scans with growing concern. The sensors are detecting some kind of emitter arrays, the analyst reported. But the energy signatures don't match any known weapon system. They're putting out acoustic frequencies. Of all things, acoustic you mean sound. In space, yes, it makes no sense. Sound doesn't propagate in vacuum. Velcros had spent enough time studying humanity to feel a chill run down his spine at those words. Unless they're not using the vacuum to transmit it, he said quietly. Unless they're transmitting it through something else. The battle began with Zarthok's confident order to advance. His dreadnoughts moving into formation with their shields at maximum strength. Sarah gave her own order from the Indomitable's command chair. Her voice calm and professional. Deploy sonic resonance mines, full spread pattern. The human ships released thousands of small devices that spread throughout the battlefield, each one approximately the size of a human fist. The Kryn fleet ignored them, focusing their plasma cannons on the human vessels instead. Then the mines activated, and the universe learned that humanity had found yet another stupid weapon that worked better than it had any right to. Each mine contained a simple system, a speaker array, a power source, and a computer programmed with detailed analysis of Kryn ship hull compositions and structural designs. The mines attached themselves to Kryn vessels using basic magnetic clamps, then began emitting precise frequency waves directly into the hull material. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The Kryn shields held. The ships continued advancing, and Zarthok laughed at what he assumed was a failed human tactic. They're trying to defeat us with noise, he announced to his fleet. This is what desperation looks like. Then the first dreadnought's hull began vibrating at its natural harmonic frequency, amplified and reinforced by dozens of mines singing in perfect synchronization. The effect was subtle at first, slight tremors that the crew barely noticed, but the vibrations built rapidly, cascading through the ship's structure as resonance effects multiplied within 60 seconds. The first dreadnought came apart, its hull fragmenting along stress lines as catastrophic structural failure propagated through every deck. Simultaneously, the crew didn't even have time to evacuate before their ship disintegrated into expanding debris. All ships. Emergency maneuvers, Zarthok ordered. But it was already too late. Mines covered every vessel in his fleet, and they were all beginning to shake. A second dreadnought exploded as its power core ruptured from the vibrations, sending a chain reaction through nearby ships. A third simply folded in half, its keel breaking as resonance destroyed the structural supports holding the vessel. Together, Sarah watched the carnage with professional detachment, knowing this was exactly what happened when you tried to force humans to fight by anyone's rules but their own. Cease fire, she ordered once it became clear the Kryn fleet was finished. Offer assistance to survivors. The battle lasted 4 minutes from first mine activation to Zarthok's surrender, and it ended with 0 human casualties against total Kryn defeat. Observers from the Galactic Council watched in stunned silence as human ships moved among the debris, rescuing Kryn crew members from shattered vessels. Crows felt something close to despair as he realized what had just happened. They found another obsolete technology and weaponized it. He said to nobody in particular. They used acoustic resonance, something most species abandoned millions of years ago as too imprecise, and they made it work better than plasma cannons. Calvaresh, who had been watching from the observation platform, started laughing quietly to himself. What's funny about this? Velcros demanded, frustrated by the scientist's reaction to such devastating warfare. Don't you see? Calvaresh replied, still chuckling. The Council tried to contain humanity by banning their weapons, so they just invented new ones using principles so old that nobody remembered to ban them. This isn't a setback for humanity. This is validation of everything I warned you about. which was that humanity doesn't win because they're advanced. They win because they're still stupid enough to try things that shouldn't work, and creative enough to make them work anyway. Velcros turned back to watch the aftermath of the battle. Seeing human medics treating wounded Kryn soldiers with the same care they would their own people. "What do we do now?" he asked. Knowing the council would expect answers, "We accept that the galaxy has changed," Calvaresh said seriously, his laughter fading. "We have a new species that fights outside every established convention, that weaponizes obsolete science with terrifying effectiveness. And that apparently cannot be contained by simply banning their current weapons, because they'll just invent new ones. On the Indomitable." Sarah received a priority communication from Earth Command, congratulating her on another successful engagement. She acknowledged the message, then turned to Marcus with a tired expression. "How long before they figure out we have 3 more experimental weapon systems in development, based on current intelligence?" "Ma'am, I'd say we have maybe 6 months before the council discovers we're also working on weaponized electromagnetic pulses, directed microwave arrays, and something the research team is calling kinetic harpoons. Kinetic harpoons. Grappling hooks fired at relativistic speeds." Apparently somebody asked, "What if we made boarding actions into weapons and nobody told them it was a stupid idea?" Sarah laughed despite the serious situation, understanding that humanity's greatest strength was also going to be their biggest diplomatic problem. They kept finding new ways to weaponize the obsolete, the abandoned, and the supposedly impossible, and the galaxy was running out of ways to stop them. Panic spread through the Galactic Council chambers like a virus, infecting species after species as representatives realized the implications of humanity's latest victory. Ambassador Velcros stood before the assembly trying to maintain order while voices rose in anger, fear, and confused demands for action. "They must be stopped," shouted the Thermal Collective's representative, her crystalline form glowing red with agitation. "Humanity has now demonstrated twice that they can defeat superior forces using weapons that violate every principle of civilized warfare. They didn't violate the terms we set," countered a delegate from the Peaceful Commerce Union. "We banned kinetic weapons and chemical propellants that used acoustic resonance, which we never considered dangerous enough to restrict, because it isn't dangerous." The Thermal Collective representative snapped back. "Except humans made it dangerous. Just like they make garbage and vibrations and chemical explosions dangerous. They're turning obsolete science into superweapons faster than we can identify threats." Velcros raised his hands for silence, knowing the debate was spiraling toward decisions that might make everything worse. The question before the council is not whether humanity's methods are conventional, but whether they represent a genuine threat to galactic security. A new voice spoke up from the back of the chamber, belonging to Executor Prime of the Mechanist Confederation. "I propose we examine humanity's scientific literature to understand what other obsolete technologies they might weaponize if we can predict their next move. We can develop countermeasures." The proposal carried by unanimous vote, and within hours, translation teams across the galaxy began downloading and analyzing millions of human scientific papers, technical manuals, and theoretical research documents. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. Human scientists were still actively researching fields that most species had abandoned when their civilizations were still in pre-spaceflight. Stages chemical reactions studied in exhaustive detail. Despite the availability of cleaner nuclear and quantum processes, mechanical engineering entire universities dedicated to understanding gears, levers, and physical forces instead of gravitic manipulation ballasts, the science of throwing objects really hard. Treated as a legitimate field of study rather than historical curiosity, material science focused on metal alloys instead of smart matter acoustic engineering for more than just entertainment. Electromagnetic Theory applied to everything from communications to potential weapons. The list went on, revealing a species that hadn't abandoned any branch of physics just because newer technologies existed. Calversh presented his analysis to a special security session of the Council 3 weeks after the Battle of Deneb. Humanity's advantage is not technological sophistication, he explained, displaying graphs and data that painted a disturbing picture. Their advantage is comprehensive ignorance of what they're not supposed to study anymore. Explain that more clearly, demanded Executor Prime. Every species in this chamber went through a predictable technological progression. Calversh continued. We discovered fire, then metallurgy, then chemistry, then nuclear physics, then quantum mechanics, then exotic matter manipulation. At each stage, we abandoned previous technologies as obsolete, as is logical and efficient. Yes, but humans haven't abandoned anything. They're still studying and improving technologies from every stage of development simultaneously. He brought up a particularly alarming example on the main display. This is a human research paper from last year proposing improvements to chemical rocket engines. They're trying to make better explosions for propulsion. Despite having access to anti-gravity technology, why would they waste resources on such primitive research? Because they don't consider it wasteful, Calversh said with frustration. They see it as maintaining diversity of approach, and that diversity means they have literally thousands of potential weapons that we've forgotten even exist. The council chamber fell silent as representatives absorbed the implications. Humanity wasn't just dangerous because of what they'd already weaponized. They were dangerous because they had an entire technological history full of concepts that could potentially be weaponized. We need to contain them, someone said, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. A coalition began forming immediately, with 15 species pledging to support restrictions on human expansion and technology. Sharing the proposal called for mandatory oversight of human research, limitations on their military development, and strict monitoring of their scientific publications. Veloc watched the coalition grow with deep misgivings, remembering Calversh's earlier warnings about trying to contain humanity through restrictions. This won't work, he said quietly to the scientist. They'll just find ways around whatever rules we impose. I know, Calversh agreed, but the council needs to try something. Even if it's futile, the alternative is accepting that we can't control or predict humanity. And that's too frightening for most species to contemplate. The containment proposal was heading for a vote when new intelligence arrived that changed everything. Human civilian activity had increased dramatically across the galaxy in the months since first contact. Traders, teachers, artists, and tourists were spreading throughout council space at an alarming rate. They're everywhere, reported the council's security chief, displaying maps showing human presence across hundreds of worlds. Human merchants are establishing trade relationships. Human educators are teaching at universities. Human artists are performing in cultural centers. That's normal for new species, Velcro said. We encourage cultural exchange. Look at what they're teaching, the security chief insisted, bringing up Corsolavi from universities across the galaxy. Human professors were teaching courses on creative problem-solving, unconventional approaches to engineering challenges, and something called design thinking that emphasized questioning established assumptions. Human traders were sharing techniques for improvisation and adaptive manufacturing. Human artists were creating works that challenged traditional aesthetic boundaries. They're spreading their mindset, Calversh said with sudden realization. They're not just present in our space. They're teaching other species to think like humans. The security chief confirmed it with grim statistics. Student enrollment in human methodology courses had increased by 300% in the last semester alone. Young engineers from a dozen different species were beginning to question why they only used modern technology when older approaches might work better for specific applications. Research. Papers citing human techniques as inspiration were appearing in journals across the galaxy. This is worse than their weapons. Executor Prime declared, "They're contaminating our intellectual traditions with their primitive thinking." But Velcro saw something different in the data. He saw young beings from conservative species asking why not instead of accepting. That's how it's always been done. He saw innovation returning to civilizations that had been technologically stagnant for millennia. Saw the spark of creativity that humanity brought starting to catch fire in minds across the galaxy. "We can't contain this," he said aloud, drawing angry stares from the Containment Coalition. "You're not understanding what's happening. Humanity isn't just teaching other species their techniques. They're teaching them to question and experiment and try new approaches." Exactly. Executor Prime snapped. "They're undermining the stable technological order that has maintained galactic peace for millions of years. Or they're ending stagnation that we've mistaken for stability," Velcros countered. Surprising himself with his own argument, the debate raged for hours, with the coalition demanding immediate action to quarantine human influence while a growing minority questioned whether containment was even desirable. Ekilovers remained silent through most of it, but finally spoke up when the coalition called for a vote on their most extreme proposal yet. "Before you vote to quarantine humanity," he said quietly, "I need to show you something." He displayed a research paper that had been published just days earlier by a young thermal collective scientist who had studied with human professors. The paper proposed improvements to plasma weapon efficiency using principles of chemical catalysis, something the thermal collective had abandoned 3 million years ago as obsolete. This researcher increased plasma weapon output by 17% using techniques humanity taught them, Calvaresh explained. And they did it by combining modern quantum mechanics with ancient chemistry that we'd forgotten. More examples follow. A Zythene engineer who improved shield efficiency using acoustic principles, acrin materials. Scientists who developed stronger hull alloys using human metallurgy techniques. A mechanist researcher who created faster-than-light communication systems by questioning assumptions about quantum entanglement. "Don't you see what's happening?" Calvaresh asked the stunned council. "Humanity isn't destroying our civilization with stupid weapons. They're destroying our complacency with stupid questions like, why can't we do it this way instead? And that's supposed to make us feel better about them," someone demanded. The ultimatum from the Galactic Council arrived with all the formal authority that 47 member species could muster, delivered directly to Earth's government with demands that brooked no negotiation. Humanity would submit to technological oversight, accept restrictions on military development, and cease the spread of what the Council termed destabilizing educational practices, or face immediate quarantine from Galactic Civilization Captain Sarah Chun. Received orders to appear before the Council as Earth's military representative, and she found herself aboard a diplomatic shuttle heading for the Council's central station with a presentation that would either save humanity's place among the stars or condemn them to isolation. Velcros met her at the docking bay, his translucent skin showing patterns of nervous anticipation. "Captain Chun, I hope you understand the seriousness of this situation. The Council is genuinely frightened of what humanity represents. Frightened of railguns and sonic weapons," Sarah said with a slight smile. "Or frightened of something else." "Both," Velcros admitted. "And if I'm honest, they're more afraid of the second thing than the first." Sarah was led to the great chamber where the Council assembled, facing representatives from species whose civilizations had existed for millions of years. Before humanity learned to make fire, she stood alone at the center platform, surrounded by beings who viewed her species as dangerous children playing with toys they didn't understand. Captain Chun, Executor Prime, began the proceedings with formal gravity. Humanity has been summoned to answer for repeated violations of civilized warfare conventions and for spreading intellectual contamination throughout Council space. Intellectual contamination, Sarah repeated carefully. That's an interesting way to describe education. You are teaching other species to abandon proven technologies in favor of primitive alternatives, the Thermal Collective representative accused. You are undermining millions of years of technological progress. Sarah activated her presentation. But instead of weapons demonstrations or technical specifications, the display showed something. Unexpected images from Earth's history stone. Tools and fire pits from humanity's earliest days, bronze weapons and iron. Forges from ancient civilizations, gunpowder. And cannons from medieval warfare, rifles and artillery from industrial age conflicts, nuclear weapons from the 20th century, railguns and missiles from the space age. This is humanity's military history, Sarah explained, walking the council through each image. And every single one of these technologies was the height of warfare sophistication at the time it was developed. We know your history, Executor Prime said impatiently. That's precisely why we're concerned. You've never met a technology you wouldn't weaponize. You're right, Sarah agreed, surprising the assembly. But you're missing the important part. We never abandon any of these technologies either. She advanced the presentation to show modern human forces training with everything from knives to kinetic weapons. Humans still train with bladed weapons despite having railguns. We still study chemical propellants, despite having access to antimatter. We still practice hand-to-hand combat despite being able to destroy planets from orbit, because we learned a long time ago that having more options is better than having just the newest option. Primitive thinking, someone muttered from the gallery. Adaptive thinking, Sarah corrected. And it's not just weapons. Humans weaponize everything, not because we're warlike, but because we're adaptable. The presentation shifted to show examples that had nothing to do with military force. Economic policies used to influence rival nations' information, campaigns that shaped public opinion, cultural exchanges that built diplomatic relationships, scientific collaboration that created mutual dependencies. We fought wars with money, with ideas, with information, with culture. We've turned everything from trade goods to entertainment into strategic tools because humans learned thousands of years ago that warfare isn't just about weapons. Velcros leaned forward, beginning to understand where Sarah was going with her argument. And you're saying this is somehow reassuring? Executor Prime demanded. I'm saying you're worried about the wrong weapon, Sarah replied. Switching the presentation to its final section, the display now showed maps of human presence throughout Council space over the past year, highlighting the same data the Council's security chief had presented weeks earlier. While you were analyzing our weapons and trying to ban our technologies, we deployed our most effective weapon system, and you helped us do it. Explain. Sarah smiled, knowing this was the moment that would decide everything. Humans are naturally social. We make friends easily. We share knowledge freely. We teach willingly. And we collaborate enthusiastically. That's not a bug in our psychology. It's a feature we've been weaponizing for our entire history. The council chamber fell silent as representatives processed what she was saying. You're telling us that human cultural exchange was deliberate strategy. Velcro said slowly, not strategy exactly, Sarah clarified. More like instinct. Humans spread their culture and ideas the same way we breathe. Automatically and constantly, we've been doing it to each other for thousands of years. And now we're doing it across the galaxy. She brought up statistics showing the spread of human educational techniques, the adoption of human problem-solving methodologies, and the increasing number of cross-species collaborations inspired by human approaches. While you debated banning our railguns, human teachers were showing your students that old technologies still have value, while you worried about sonic weapons. Human traders were demonstrating that improvisation and adaptation work better than rigid optimization while you tried to contain our military. We were already winning a completely different kind of war. This is manipulation, Executor Prime declared angrily. You admit to deliberately undermining our civilization. No, Sarah countered firmly. We're offering an alternative to stagnation, and the fact that so many beings across the galaxy are choosing to learn from humans suggests they wanted that alternative. Talvarish stood up from his observation seat, drawing surprised looks from the council members. She's right, he said quietly. I've been studying humanity for months, and I finally understand what makes them dangerous. It's not their weapons or their technology. It's their mindset. Thank you for that assessment, Executor Prime said with barely controlled sarcasm. You don't understand, Calvarish insisted. Walking toward the center platform, humans are dangerous because they make everyone around them start thinking like humans. They're contagious. He gestured to the data Sarah had presented, his patterns showing something. That might have been admiration or fear. Every species that interacts with humans starts asking, why not, instead of accepting. That's how it's done. Young beings start questioning assumptions. Researchers start exploring abandoned fields. Engineers start combining old and new technologies. Humanity isn't destroying our civilization. They're ending our intellectual stagnation. And you consider this a good thing? Someone asked incredulously. I consider it inevitable, Calvarish replied. Because you can't contain ideas once they start spreading. You can quarantine humanity, but you can't quarantine curiosity. Sarah watched the council struggle with this reality, seeing representatives conferring urgently with advisors and each other. You have a choice, she said into the uncertain silence. You can try to contain humanity and cut yourselves off from the innovation we're inspiring. Or you can accept that the galaxy has changed and work with us to shape what comes next. Those are both terrible options, Velcros observed, though his tone suggested sympathy rather than criticism. Welcome to dealing with humans, Sarah said with a slight smile. We specialize in creating situations where all the options are uncomfortable, but one of them is still better than the others. The debate that followed lasted for hours, with passionate arguments on all sides about the dangers and opportunities that humanity represented. The Containment Coalition argued that allowing human influence to spread unchecked would destroy the stable galactic order that had lasted for millions of years. The opposing faction countered that the stable order had become stagnation, and humanity offered a chance for renewal and growth. Executor Prime finally called for a vote on the quarantine proposal, and the chamber fell silent as representatives registered their positions. The vote failed by a narrow margin, with just enough species deciding that the risk of falling behind was worse than the disruption of accepting humanity. Sarah felt relief flood through her as the results were announced, knowing she'd just saved Earth's place among the stars. But Velcros approached her after the session with a serious expression that dampened her celebration. You won today, Captain Chun, but you need to understand something. Many members of this council are still terrified of humanity, and they'll be watching for any excuse to revisit the quarantine proposal. I understand, Sarah said sincerely. We'll be careful. No, you won't, Velcros replied with surprising insight. Being careful would require humans to stop being human. You'll keep teaching and sharing and spreading your mindset because that's what you do. Then what should we do?